I suspect this next session is between you all and Bedford. Let's get started so we can end on time.
Excuse me, will you be sitting here for
Thanks, you guys. Hey everyone, this is the plenary round regarding financial services and what our collective requirements might look like with respect to compute and storage. Show of hands, I'd love to know who in the room they actually work for a financial services firm or a technology company that supports that industry. Very good, thank you guys. So my name is Paul Gallico. I head up business development for Octane Technology. We're a small technology advisory and engineering firm based in New York. We serve the financial services community as well as the technology suppliers that serve that industry and in other industries as well, but we have a portfolio on both sides of that equation. Tonight we've assembled a panel of financial services technology professionals with the experience and expertise and willingness to share their perspective around those technologies of the future regarding compute and storage that may be most relevant, not necessarily to the firms that they're associated with, but to the industry as a whole. So I'll introduce the panelists momentarily. Before I do, I guess just to get us all thinking along the same lines, I'd like to share a few thoughts and perhaps some thought-provoking questions with respect to some of what we've all heard today in some of the various sessions, as well as some of the priorities that you may be dealing with on a day-to-day basis already. And a lot of the technology discussions around today, it's all about software-defined storage. It's about scale-out architectures, and all of that is great. This is all, a lot of what I heard today was from a supplier's perspective, which is extremely helpful. I think what the panel represents today is from a customer's perspective. I can certainly interject with what I'm hearing from some of our Wall Street clients and throughout the industry as a whole. But I think it'll be great to hear from all of you what some of your most pressing requirements might look like, or questions for the panel with respect to some of the big transformation that we'll be discussing tonight, and a lot of what we've heard earlier today. How is it that how is it that the financial services industry as a whole is going to influence that type of transformation within the industry as it pertains to compute and storage and other areas, other domains? What is it that's unique about the financial services industry that represents something compelling that the technology suppliers will actually engineer to those specifications and really focus in on that industry as a whole? Some of the other innovation that we're experiencing now, some of it is just now emerging onto the scene. Diablo was here this week with channel memory storage, and those are interesting and valuable technologies, but they're just emerging. So what is it that within the compute environment is actually going to take us to the next level? How will that be exploited throughout the industry and various workloads and use cases? Cloud computing, big data. I mean, we can kind of take that further, and I'm sure we'll touch on all of those issues during tonight's session. So I encourage you to consider these issues, in the context of what's happening within your organization, what are those priorities that you're dealing with, and bring those questions to the panel this evening. I'd like to introduce the panel at this time. Jacob Hall, he's probably got the best job title I've ever heard. He's an innovation wrangler. Are there any other innovation wranglers? He's the head of wholesale labs at Wells Fargo. He's got over 20 years of experience in financial services. He's been immersed in evaluating and deploying emerging technology solutions across business segments while partnering with technology entrepreneurs, investors, and business executives. Wholesale Labs is a global technology incubator, presently innovating solutions across 200 initiatives at the bank. Welcome, Jacob. Also with us is Robert Ortega. He's a principal enterprise strategist with Microsoft's financial services segment. He's a trusted advisor and architect to some of the largest global banks, and his areas of expertise include strategy and architecture for global payment systems, service-oriented architectures, data architectures, and cloud solutions. He previously served as a CTO for a fixed income order management startup and has held additional senior architectural roles for global banking institutions. He's also the inventor of 4 patent applications related to investment banking origination. Welcome, Robert. Lastly, I'd like to introduce you to Himanshu Baral, who's the Vice President of Innovation, Intellectual Property, and Emerging Technology at Wells Fargo. He's been at Wells Fargo for over 10 years and previously held roles as Senior E-Business Manager and Lead Systems Architect for consumer lending. His areas of expertise include strategy and architecture in big data and cloud analytics, including real-time predictive prescriptive analytics, cloud service-oriented architecture, and delivering financial services and insurance applications and high-tech products. Himanshu was also previously the co-founder of Aviona Networks. Welcome, Himanshu. With that, I'd like to introduce Jacob Hall and welcome him to share his position statement around these issues of compute and storage.
Great, thanks, Paul. Well, running Wholesale Labs, I hear a lot about interesting new technologies all the time because it's short sales guys who often call on us and try to pitch and sell the technology. What my team does inside the bank is innovation wranglers, and I'm not the only one. This is just like a title, just like a SA or DBA. My job is to help argue for your great innovations, get them into the bank, and help internal entrepreneurs build their ideas. And so, in doing that, it's pretty challenging, honestly, to try to keep up with so many awesome and cool technologies. We want to bring them all in, but we can't bring them all in. And so we have our own internal mechanism for filtering, and that is if you have one of your guys come to me and they say, hey, we got this new flash storage device, we want to bring it in, have you guys check it out, and I was like, and what we'll do is we'll internally try to find a business sponsor to check out the technology, give you feedback, and that can be anywhere from the early stage entrepreneurs in the garage all the way through IPO. And some of you guys may or may not know, if you ever think about starting a company, since you're in the tech space, check out accelerator.wellsfargo.com. We're making investments, 50 to 500K in tech companies, and that is a tech and business side focused effort. We're investing in energy-related clean tech technology and just over a $10 million fund there. And I say that just to mention that Wells is very deeply committed to the tech sector. We're based right up the street for you guys, so it's easy for us to get here. So with that, I have a lot of opinions of technology, and they're my personal opinions. I can't say I represent all of Wells Fargo or really the entire banking industry, but I've been around for 20 years and doing R&D, bringing in new tech, been on some of you guys' advisory boards, spoken to Open Fabrics Alliance, various things over the years. And I think a lot of the ideas I've had kind of still remain the same, is that we need to modularize computing. And that's why I've been on the advisory board for Open Server Summit now for a while, is because I really truly believe that if we open up the computing specifications, that we'll see innovation in other areas that are more fundamental to the financial services industry. And so we want things like hardware that optimizes itself. I mean, no longer do we need servers that have empty slots and allocated power reserved that we never fill up. What we want is a fit-for-purpose device that it's designed to consume an X amount of power, and that's what it consumes when we plug it in. Or better yet, reverse the whole thing. Give us more hardware than we have power footprint for, and then have the intelligence to only turn on the hardware that's needed based on the software workload. I see in the future artificial intelligence crawling our network, watching what's going on to help predict and identify issues with security, availability issues. But in order for that to happen, we have to have deep metrics into the hardware. We need to understand how memory bandwidth is being used, not just how much memory. We need to have fine-grained control over the cores, and we want to make sure that the processor type that an app's deployed on is the right type for the application workload. The other thing we want to do is, in order to move to public cloud, if you ever want things to move there, is to give us tools for anonymizing data, not just encrypting, but anonymized data as it goes out to public cloud, allow us to analyze it and on the way back in, unanonymize it, so we can use the cloud efficiently for big data analytic projects. That's my pitch. And I want to say that, this is a very short period of time to tell you a lot of things about technology, so I just welcome all of you. If you have a technology, you want to talk to us, come up to me afterwards, like give me my business card, and we'll follow up and have more conversations afterwards.
Thanks, Jacob. Robert?
Hello, everyone. From my perspective, the key thing that from a financial institution's needs that I'll share with you is all about strategic agility. And it's also about reducing the risk of execution to get to the target state and balancing that with the total cost of ownership for a given solution. So at the end of the day, the perspective is that it is all about the services that will run on a particular server or a particular private cloud. More importantly, the value increases as we move from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service and to software as a service. So ultimately, from my perspective, what financial institutions really need is a path to rapidly deliver the promise of the services. Also, there's a need for the replacement and the scaling out of this environment once the environment is in place. For example, if I need to replace something, it should be as easy as identifying the unit of replacement and just plugging and playing the new part and going from there. Today in financial institutions, it's a big challenge to get infrastructure in the data center and to have teams to put it all together. So I really feel that from a converged system perspective, that could be a very viable solution to deliver the expected value of a server or of a private cloud, which in turn, we can think of as a collection of servers working together as a unit. That's my position.
Sure.
Hi, at Wells Fargo these days, I am kind of more involved with respect to innovation, emerging technology, and also intellectual property. That's become a big thing right now. Early on, banks were not too much into really IP protection, and because of the so-called patent trolls and others, we have to keep an eye on things. And so I get to see what's happening, what are the pain points within an enterprise like Wells Fargo. And now for example, there are a lot of things happening in payments, but there are factors that prevents us from doing the standard stuff you might think like security and compliance and the like. But we will talk about how you as the service providers and the vendors and the technology partners can help us. And so the few things I want to mention here, the first one is, there has not been good adoption, like my friend Robert talked about the cloud. And to take a look at it, the cloud, be it the private or the hybrid cloud, the adoption has not really taken off. And there is a lot of other factors behind it. And Jay talked about how we need to make things modular. But in terms of really making it happen, we have our operation folks, but they don't have the tools today or the training to easily do that. It's a more of an intellectual exercise that yes, it's scalable, it's cost effective, it's OpEx, not CapEx. Those are all wonderful things, but when it comes down to them, it's not easy for them to do it. And in general, we human beings are not so adept at changes. We love to say intellectually, I love change, but how many of us will really go through the real change, right? So if the industry as a whole can make it easy for the so-called DevOps folks to really, automate as much as possible, guide them through the process of making it happen. And see what has happened, like Robert talked about the services. what we as a financial services industry want is the application. Now we know that we need the services, we need the servers, we need the network, we need the storage. But at the end, it's the application that really gives us the competitive advantage or makes us do our business processes, right? So one area is how can we get the right tools and make it easier for the so-called new class of DevOps folks to do their job. The second thing I want to talk a little about is security, like anything else. Imagine that you have an account with a bank and you suddenly realize that your checking account had $1 less. What kind of feeling are you going through? It's a very different feeling. It's not about the $1. It means a lot more than that, right? So there has been a lot of improvements in the security side with the keys that can be kept on, as Jake was telling you, even if you anonymized data. There are various ways of doing it. And cloud has become a lot secure with the hardware security module and the like. But if at a hardware level you can enable things to be a lot more like a mini HSM in each of the devices, when we're talking of the Internet of Things, and it's the matter of the weakest link that gets exposed, right, as we have seen in most cases. So how can we make inherently things more secure, right? And then the other thing I want to talk a little about is analytics. And if I take my background, I started out as an object-oriented programmer many years ago, decades ago actually. And so I was very impressed when we took concepts from the hardware world to the software world. So when it's a chip is a chip, doesn't matter where you put it in. That was not true with the software. If I had functional monolithic code, wherever I put the function, that impacted the whole thing. So the object-oriented world made it possible. Like, if it's a chair as an object, I don't have to worry about what is inside. I just ask, what are you made up of? Metal or wood or whatever it is. How many legs do you have? 3 or 4? It tells me. It's very encapsulated. It's a high level of abstraction and all those wonderful things. Now, if you took up analytics, and I just briefly mentioned early on, how can I take all the learnings and all our servers and network? There are a lot of they're very well instrumented. There's a lot of sensor-like devices or instrumentation points where we get a lot of data. Can we use that to actually help me manage my things? So again, the cloud is elastic, scalable, all those wonderful things, right? But still, you can take it to one level higher if you can use the ongoing real-time analytics and predict what's going on, and then automatically allocate. It's okay. Now there's some element. If you take Amazon Web Services, you can do auto scaling to a certain degree, but not all components in the stack, right? So if somehow we can use the analytics, that is, take the software world into the hardware world and try to auto provision, auto do things, that would be very useful in my mind. And finally, so any help we can get to make things more secure and compliant. Again, those are the necessary evils we have to deal with. And again, in some cases, like those could be the points of innovation, right? If you make our financial services companies easier to do some of that, via some of your offerings, that would be great.
Thank you, Machu, and thank you guys. At this time, I'd like to invite anyone in the audience to ask some questions of the panel.
Does Wells Fargo participate in the Open Data Center Alliance, and if so, what are the initiatives that you are supporting in the Open Data Center Alliance?
Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that, but follow up with me afterwards and I'll check into it.
Thank you.
I just want to ask you guys, do you know any company's data center or any kind of data center which are using software as software-defined data center? Which data center is a software-defined data center? This data center use open source software, and if you know any, what's the pro and what's the con, what's the advantage, what's the disadvantage compared to traditional proprietary software data center?
Oh, so you're wanting to know if there's
use
I can
case.
assume it's fully SDN?
We have a use case of data software.
Oh, not our data centers, we're just checking. Okay. Not really. I haven't seen one that's SDN. There's a few that obviously the cloud companies have figured out how to do automated provisioning. And there's one data center company I can think of, I probably should mention their name. Just out of respect for the summit.
So did you say?
Ask me afterwards, I'll tell you.
My point is, today we talk about a lot of software-defined server, and tonight software-defined data center. We talked for many years, but I just want to know if we have actually a software-defined data center which is in operation, which company has kind of data center, where is the data center located, what's the pros, what's the cons, and what's the advantage to use this open source data center.
As Jacob said, all the major cloud companies are running a software-defined data center. If they were not doing that, they would not be able to scale to the level that they do. So when it comes to software-defined networking or software-defined compute and software-defined storage, that's really what powers a public cloud. Any modern public cloud operates in that manner. And there are companies that are using other private cloud technologies in their data centers. Maybe not to the full extent that we would like to, but it is happening.
Sounds like Microsoft might be a good reference.
Yeah, and let me add, as you said, most data centers do have some elements of that, right? So at the end of the day, you're not, like if it's Amazon, like you're defining what your EC2 instance is. You're not going and like allocating storage or allocating and putting a like certain CPU or a code to it. It's at a very high abstract level. It's software. You're dealing with software. And if you take one level higher, there is one company who was probably investing. It's not public information. So there, it's actually knobs. You just tell, like I want, this many IOPS, this much. Even it doesn't worry about the storage. It'll automatically allocate the storage, and this much compute. So it's one level higher than, for example, EC2 instance or the like. So you're dealing at a very high level. It's all software at the end of the day. So even there is someone else who's actually taking care of all the racks and all the servers and everything else. But to me, it is a software. So we do use that. In fact, we do experiment. Again, I cannot say on behalf of Wells Fargo, but it is there, and we do use that.
Yeah, I'll just give you one more comment. This is a very general thing, but when someone creates a virtual machine, let's say a Linux virtual machine or a Microsoft Windows virtual machine, and right after that you attach storage to it, that is in a way you're using software-defined storage. You are attaching programmatically storage to a virtual machine, and in essence almost the whole thing is virtualized. So that's and it's elemental at the foundation level, so an example of how that could happen.
Thank you, guys. We'll leave it there. Another question?
Hi, Brian Johnson with PowerRocks. Might as well stir the pot a little. Do you guys see needs to utilize this technology to perhaps even the playing field, or to kind of basically curb things like high-speed trading, or utilize the technology in a way that brings the financial system? And I don't mean it as a political question. I mean it as a serious technological application question.
So you mean for software-defined storage or networking?
Yeah, I mean, can you use all this virtual so it's been very difficult to just fight, hardcore, hardwired latency, right? And try to put things like buffers in place and all that. So, I mean, I don't know much about software-defined, anything. So that's why I'm wondering, you as the experts in this sector, do you see being able to utilize this technology in a way to help curb that type of, like I call it, an uneven playing field in the financial sector?
And can I interject just to add a little bit to that? So is it really more latency sensitive applications such as trading, And is there a role for software-defined storage for those types of
Software-defined governor or
applications?
something, yeah, anti-latency, what do you call it?
Yeah, so are you asking like, would it be easier for us to switch off the existing predominant vendor for networking, for example? If, software-defined networking were there?
Well, and again, I don't know much about how to utilize this to implement it. I'm just asking at a theoretical level, I guess. I mean, I know that there are, buffers were attempted to be put in place to mitigate a purely hardware kind of advantage. So I'm wondering, can you utilize this technology as well to help either redefine, reinforce, or strengthen, or optimize that type of buffer?
Yeah, so on the algo trading side, where this really matters, where we're real-time trading the market and the latency makes a big difference. You can make the difference between making a lot of money and losing some money.
Yeah.
And so anything that gives us the ability to control our switches and see what's happening at a software layer inside of our processes is definitely going to help. So I think opening up the network switches will lead to more innovations. It would allow us to use different technologies from various vendors. So rather than having trying to program specifically to one specific technology, like maybe trying to use Nebula or something like that, as a rudimentary way to integrate. And I can see a lot of interesting innovations happening there, particularly with like DR. If you think about it, this real-time trading, we still have to DR this stuff somewhere. Is that for going?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we have to DR, 100 miles away at least. So if something happens in New York City, we can recover, and we don't lose positions in the various exchanges. So definitely see benefits of being able to monitor the traffic that's flowing, have better control over it, know what's going on over the network switch, and be able to tune it. Just like we might optimize processes inside the kernel, like removing processes we don't really need to reduce interrupts. So I definitely can see that helping. And same thing for the storage side, by the way, because storage latency can cause a problem for us as well.
Yeah, one of the areas that, I know you asked a very open question, but one of the areas that is very applicable to software-defined compute, the actual compute part, is in the high-performance computing and simulations that I carried out when you try to calculate a price for a particular financial instrument, let's say a fixed income derivative, or when you try to calculate a measure of risk. And typically what happens is that you have a bank of computers, let's say 50,000 cores. Some banks will have more than that. And instead of doing that, what you can do from a cloud perspective is that you can use software-defined compute to spin up X amount of machines in order to do that computation. And then when you're finished doing that, you just spin them down so that you don't have to have an inventory of machines that are always there. So you only use the compute when you need it, and you will use software-defined compute to achieve that from a private cloud perspective, from a public cloud perspective.
Right, and if I can add a little on the analytics side, so massively parallel in-memory, highly compressed analytics, we use that to help with the actual trading transactions and the like. So we need to analyze what's happening, what are the trends, what can be done. So we do use that. And early on it was more grid computing. Now of course there will be elements of cloud.
Yes, so a lot of the grid computing, basically, a lot of the grid computing platforms that today run on a on-premise data center could be provisioned dynamically using software-defined compute, and then they will run somewhere else where when they're not in use, you can spin them down and not pay for that inventory. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. One question, we'll come right back to you.
Okay.
Thanks.
So, since most of you folks are from the financial industry, what do you think of Apple's Apple Pay, and how does it impact the financial industry?
Oh, Wells Fargo likes Apple Pay. We were one of the launch partners for those guys, right?
But at the end of the day, with the credit cards going away, if you really this becomes successful, because security was the fundamental block. Other was, between the security and extremely fast interconnect. Those were the two handicaps that were, holding us back from on-premise all the way to cloud. If security and interconnect were fast enough, we'll be moving to the cloud much faster. So financial industry is under attack for that matter, at least what I'm talking about the pay side of the picture. So my question was related really back to the pay, bill pay and all those kind of things. And credit cards and the whole shebang that goes behind the scenes. Wells Fargo is obviously a bank and it affects them somewhere along the line. So that's my question. How does it impact some of the banks and people who are in the financials?
Well, look, my personal opinion here is that the innovation that Apple Pay brought was helpful to us to reduce fraud. But more importantly, it enabled our customers to access their bank accounts in a way that was good for them and their special phone. So I think, from a Wells Fargo perspective, we want to give our customers what they want, and we want to improve the security of transactions, and Apple Pay did that for us. Thanks, guys.
Right, so we are actually working with Apple Pay and the like, and we like it. It's fabulous. So it's not a threat, it's not anything else. And as you said, things are getting a lot more secure in many areas, and this is one example that will hopefully make it a lot easier on the consumers, and we will play with that.
Thanks, guys. Hold up, if you can hold up 1 second. We have a question in the back.
I just had a question about open source, and is there a position the financial community is taking about open source software versus proprietary versus homegrown, and what's the impact of open source in the financial apps?
I'll take that one. So let me answer this a little broadly. You take any company, be it Microsoft, Google, Apple, or any company, their key product, even the Microsoft operating system, is done by 5 to 10 people. It's never more than that. They may have other support and extended team, but the brainchild, the brain thing is about 4 or 5 people. Now, if you take a look at what's happening in the open source world, Spark as an example, I'm just taking one of the analytic products. There are about 100 developers, many of them PhDs. And there's a lot more brain power in some of these open source products today than it is ever even big companies like Google and Microsoft can do. That's why you see they're leveraging open source a lot and they're contributing. It's not out of their own goodness of heart. They're building up the ecosystem. They're benefiting, they have to benefit others. LinkedIn is contributing to open source. Facebook is contributing to open source, right? If you think of it. These are the best of the best developers. It's not like some average guy, part-time job, sitting and contributing when he or she wants to make a difference to the world. It's a different ballgame, right? The second part is, again, this is my own opinion, it's not Wells Fargo, is that before it was a black box. If I bought from vendor A, B, or C, now open source, I can see the code. It's much better to me to see it than black box it. Third thing is, in terms of the open, there's a lot of communities, vendors who are providing the service. One approach is many of us are going that way for the hand-holding. Others, we are also developing, or should be developing more of our internal people who understand and contribute, be on top of the open source. So we are in the discussion. And let me add a little. With all this financial services, like Target and the like things, so the security and other things have gone to a very high level. If you take a look at the evolution of the industry, the CIO reported to the CFO about 20 years ago. Then the CIO reported to the CEO sometime in the Now the CIO is sitting on the board of some company because security is so important, among other things. Because CEOs can be fired. You understand what I'm trying to say? So it has become very important. So from that perspective, they're saying it's better for me to see something, and the open source community is very active, and it's well tested. If you use an algorithm like from R, people have tested it. Rather than some arbitrary guy, you hire a consultant who will craft a little data science craft algorithm, you may or may not know enough about it. So I think the open source community has become super vibrant, along with the reducing price of the hardware and the software and all that stuff. That has created all this, the frenzy for innovation. I hope I answered that question.
Well, I like your question because it makes me think about the open hardware. And I hope that in open hardware we don't have to indemnify everything, because that was such a pain for a while there. It hasn't come up recently though. But yeah, it's like we're very respectful and thoughtful about the licenses that we choose. And I think all the banks are, the ones that I know have interacted with. So be careful to review the fine print on the licenses as we choose products. Also reviewing the code and make sure there's not something bad in there. I don't think we would have that problem with open servers and open computing though, because it's a little, you have to go through a little more rigorous process to get something deployed. So I think eventually we're going to be just as embracing across the board with open hardware.
Thank you, guys. Next question.
Just like you to walk us through your typical evaluation process. Let me be specific for a hardware-based product. And I know you've worked many years, 20 years, and I didn't catch pretty much of it. What's the fastest cycle you've seen from seeing the product first time and into getting into your system? Whatever, we don't need names and all, just what's the fastest and what was the vendor doing something right or how well they were prepared to get fastest acceptance into your system?
Well, I'm going to say it varies greatly when it comes to hardware. So like I run Wholesale Labs is in the wholesale division of Wells Fargo. Okay, this is like 75,000 corporate customers, about 35,000 of employees covering securities, all the wholesale trading, investment banking, and insurance products, all the commercials. So if you're a company and you do business with a bank, that's wholesale. And so I sit within the business unit and supporting all those teams on a lot of interesting needs. And then we have these enterprise partners. And this is very typical for a big bank, or really any company. We have these enterprise partners and they control certain technologies, like which storage products we're going to use or networking technologies we're going to bring in. You have a lot of technology, it doesn't really matter who you are. You have a limited amount of budget to manage that technology. And so they have to be very thoughtful about what they allow in and not in. And the example I like to use for bringing in innovative technology is PCI Express Flash. Because several years ago, we didn't allow PCI Express Flash. Like a vendor came, so we had this lab project came in, this analytical project. And the vendor, and I'll leave them nameless, said, we need to use spinning drives, not a SAM, because that's what we know works, it's fast, and it's better. And we said, when the lab project came in, we were working with this vendor, this cool version taking startup, and again, nameless. But we said, hey, why don't you bring this technology in, it'll be faster. And the vendor argued with us, the software vendor. They said, no, we want spinning hard drives. No, you don't understand, this is going to be faster than spinning hard drives. So we had to argue with the vendor a little bit, get them on board with it. So at the same time, we went to our enterprise storage architect and we said, hey, PCI Express Flash Storage is here, we're ready to use it, we got a business case for it, let's work together. And so at that point, they didn't want to pay attention because they had more important things. They're trying to manage risk, they're trying to make sure the bank keeps running. Okay, that is their day job, is to manage risk. My job inside the lab is to manage exposure. Okay, exposure to lost opportunities, to lost investment opportunities. And so we bring the technology in, and over about a 7-month period, we validate it in the lab. The users get it up and running. We prove it out, works really, really well. We go back to the technology team, and we say, hey, here's a use case. We tested it against SAN and UAT and prod. We see like 1,300 megabytes per second. So, sometimes people respond very strangely, and they're looking at something like the fiber channel bandwidth that's being used, and they say, oh, you're not using all the bandwidth. Why do you need 1,300 megabytes per second? Great question. Well, because when we run these transactions, our business processes, we get 3 times the amount of throughput for fraud calculations and cross-sell. And so we know this works, that doesn't work as well for us. And so they worked with us, and then they went through an eval process looking at all the vendors very thoughtfully. It took about 8 months after that to get it in. So it could be anywhere from a year to a year and 3 months, worst case. And I think, and part of that delay in that particular case was due to the merger, was going on. So you have to be cognizant of what's going on in the overall economy, right? Because if a company's going through a merger or something like that, it's going to slow things down, right? If you've been hacked, you're going to put your attention on the security problems first. And so I think in terms of prioritizing who you help and when you help them, just think about what's going on. Read their public news ticker. And if they had a hack and you sell a security product, it's probably a good time to go reach out to them, and you can go in really fast, right? Because I can tell you of an example, without giving you details, where we got it in 3 months. Brand new hardware technology, had nothing like it before. And we got it in.
And if I can add, that is very important. It's what is our pain point, and if we can address it at the right time, there's nothing better, right? It's not a vitamin, it's a painkiller. So the other part in general is that if you want to minimize the need for extensive, like certification of your product, so if let's say we use certain hardware from certain vendors, if you create your, so let's say for that, where you're doing a little appliance, if it fits that thing, wonderful. And if the operating system and everything else we use, if it is similar to that, then the certification is much easier. So don't throw brand new stuff, right? Don't make it too complicated. And if it is, it's more of a not a forklift replacement thing, then it's much easier for adoption like anything else, right? And if you want me to throw something away, then I have to do a bigger validation and bigger use case justification for that. So the easier you can make it on us to get your thing in, the faster it will. Would that be okay, Jake?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the really smart companies have labs and they embrace technology because that's the only way you can keep up with the hackers. Right? You guys are brilliant. You create brilliant technologies. So sometimes when we get up here and we say, well, we're missing something, you might think to yourself, we have that, or I've seen that somewhere. The problem is it didn't make it all the way through for some reason. So I think, making it easy for us to ingest and adopt is really important.
And if you want to also do, like as Jake was telling, we do invest in startup companies. We have Northwest Venture, that's our arm, venture arm. We are in the Valley, headquartered, and plus we do incubation work. So if you're one of the lucky ones, you just get in through the door. But that's the easiest path to answer your question.
Okay, because you triggered a question in my mind. So you talked about cyber attacks, or at least referenced, what we've all witnessed within the banking industry. As it pertains to the future of compute and storage, and you had earlier, Jacob, referenced purpose-built solutions. So what would you anticipate down the road in terms of purpose-built solutions specifically built around cyber attacks and the prevention of those?
I think just very strong encryption technologies that are easy and transparent to implement, where more of the encryption functions are embedded in the processors and on board, more chip-based, so we don't experience a latency issue. App firewalls, that's a big area of interest for banks because of DDoS attacks. And the attacks, this is a sensitive area for banks. Okay, and we protect our networks very, very well. But there's always advances, and there's always hackers coming up with new ways to get in, and so we have to stay on our toes. So the best thing I could say is make sure that whatever you give us is low latency, that you tested. So if you're giving some software feature to analyze data, or you turn all the security information into big data, just make sure it's fast, low latency, so we can actually put it in the path of the user and interrupt the session if it looks like something bad, without affecting, like, you logging on to your own banking account.
Good, thanks.
And if I can add to that, sure. As Jake was telling, if you built in a little analytics or show us that you're, like how you're making it more secure to prove it to us, because we don't want to deal with the black box saying, yeah, it does it, and it's pretty easy in some cases if it is like supervised learning. You can very easily, I'll give you some existing data, you can tell these are the likely bad things, and I can test it very, very easily. So it's not like rocket. Unsupervised learning is a little tricky, but if you can help us not only make it more secure, but prove to us that it actually is and it's working, then that's wonderful.
Yeah, the context of security in financial services institutions is a very broad thing. For example, from a separation of duties perspective, if you are an SA or if you are a DBA of a database, you're not supposed to be looking at the data that's in the database. So it gives you an idea of the types of needs. There's a need for the data itself to be protected, regardless of where it is at rest. And obviously, to do that, at some point, the data needs to be properly encrypted, either using something like format preserving encryption with AES-256 or some other type of mechanism. So one of the things that I can share with you is that there's more and more interest in format preserving encryption that is processable and where the data can be moved to any location, and you can still do your queries, you can still do your calculations, and at the time that the results need to be presented, only then the data is decrypted. So
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah.
Another question here?
Well, more along the line that your gentlemen have been addressing here for what I believe is primarily a hardware crowd. Can you talk about your system platform architecture, the various aspects that are typical of a financial institution? Literally, what type of hardware you're utilizing, whether you're still on speedy media, you apparently adopted some flash technologies, whether they're SSDs, whether they're flash arrays, whether they're going to be non-volatile DIMMs. Can you talk about what percentage of that hardware is in-house? What percent of that hardware might be in a colo? Are you using infrastructure as a service yet, as a bank? I understood there's a big security concern here. From a hardware perspective, talk about your platform architecture and even potentially out into your network of ATMs, so I think would be interesting to a hardware crowd. On the software side, I would be interested in knowing if you're allowing managers in the bank to use front ends, like I saw at the Data 360 conference last week, to orchestrate, provision their own servers. On the analytics side, I'd be interested in knowing, from a software perspective, if you use products like DataVeer now, where you don't have to know Linux programming, but can do your own Hadoop analytics if you're a salesperson or a marketing person or a finance person and bypass system administration and DevOps. What is Wells Fargo doing in the broad hardware area and in this open software-defined X area? Are you allowing your employees to provision and orchestrate and to get to data that they might have otherwise not been allowed in the past to do, for example, analytics on Hadoop or Spark?
As your attorney, I have to jump in here for a second. No. Thanks for all that. I think most of that we'll have to take offline to just be sensitive to the fact that there is some confidentiality of information and the responses in direct response to those questions. But to the extent that you can address some things across the board, and Robert, for sure, across a cross-section of your banking customers, what you're experiencing out there, be my guest to respond to any or all of that.
Yes, how about this? I'll take hardware, and Robert will take the cloud stuff, and then why don't you talk about analytics? That's pretty fitting for us.
And the rest,
Take over now?
yeah, but take offline.
So hardware-wise, I mean, we're an x86 shop, and still some Spark and mainframe. It's pretty typical of all banks, you know. But a lot of more commodity commuting is interesting to us because we lower the cost of managing the technology. Operating systems that run on that x86 platform are interesting for us, both open source and non-open source. I think, from a hardware perspective, flash, any technology, including all flash arrays that accelerate storage, is going to be interesting to us. And there are specific use cases in trading that fit right along with it. We have to have it. For virtualization, we have to have storage arrays that can handle lots of VMs simultaneously, rebuilding a virus scan database without pausing all the machines. We have long-haul connections where we need networking technologies that can stop retransmits of packets over long haul, reduce the latency, and improve the overall experience. We deployed some of those technologies, not all of them, some of them. And I think what we're looking for, and I'll say we have private cloud, so you can tell you more about what we have in the lab. It's easier. The storage side, we definitely want things like thin provisioning, the ability to recover very fast. Any kind of virtualization is interesting. The snapshot, all the typical things you find in the storage array, we take advantage of it. Tiering, it's the ability to take advantage of whatever new medium of technology storage comes along. I'm going to be able to rapidly deploy it, make use of it. I like on the PCI Express Flash side, not just speaking of the hardware, but how we use it. I love it if databases could more readily across the board talk to the Flash and take advantage of it directly. Ballooning of memory, it's a great use. There's a VM product that does that today. It's really useful. Where if you run out of physical RAM, it can file all off to the flash storage. think anything that moves the data closer to the computing is a big deal for us. So it could be, you know, an all RAM array, and there would be uses for that. So I'd say anything in the hardware space we're going to want to use. Robert, Paul?
I can share maybe a couple of things with you. For example, in terms of the hardware that is used for the compute, it's typically around, I don't know, 16 cores or 8 cores as a typical type commodity server that has those cores. When it comes to data warehousing, it's a little different in most banks, and you find the major server brands, and you then will be talking about boxes along the lines of trying to shy away from mentioning name, but I'll give you an equivalent, maybe an HP 580 type server, and in some cases maybe an HP 980. So with sometimes more than 60 cores. You find the type that's on the compute side. On the storage side, there's still a lot of SAN storage. What I hear is significant dissatisfaction with SAN storage because of the complexity and the cost associated with it. And I continually hear that there's a very strong desire towards moving to a shared nothing type storage. So that gives you some ideas without me saying too many specifics.
And to answer your question, yes, we are open to, we do use, again, I cannot tell you at what level, different Hadoop distributions, and we are experimenting with all the different open source technologies to see how fast. And again, in some cases it may not be big volume of data, but of course like velocity, variety, veracity, all those other V's and other factors. So we do that, and there are certain needs as to how fast we can do it. And I cannot tell you the general direction we are providing, but in general, we are open to and trying out all the different possibilities because those are all relevant to it. At the end of the day, financial services is a very technology-centric business, which our business partners may not readily acknowledge, right? And of late, it was probably not the story like 50 years ago. And the need to be on top of it is driven partly because of the need for security and compliance, because we just cannot sit back. And so we are open and we do experiment with all those types.
Question? How often do you come across power utilization efficiency and power efficiencies and with stakeholders? My name is Hardy Foruhar. I'm with a company called Computer Air Power Systems. We mostly work with the IT server room and the facilities in the Western region. Thank you.
You may take that. So how often do we come across the need to improve PUE or?
Security is a big pain point, obviously, but just in light of sustainability issues within the data center environment, in this conference we deal with the various pieces, but just as an aggregate, how often does it come up in conversations, or just what's, if you were to rate it?
Okay, so I'd say, Wells Fargo has publicly stated goals to reduce carbon footprint. So as a company, we care a lot. We have around 2 to 3 billion invested in lent out in renewable energy. And that may not be a super well-known thing in the energy space. We have quite a bit going on, green. And the same happens for data centers. We think about how much energy we're using. And my personal thought, I think about it quite a bit because I have a limited amount of lab space. And I have a limited amount of cooling. So I'm thinking, all right, well, I've got a demand curve for the lab. At some point, I'm going to need to add more capacity. I want to make sure I'm making the best use of the space and the cooling. And my thought here is I want to be able to upgrade the data center faster. That leaving hardware in the data center for 48 months, maybe in the future, is not the best design. That perhaps we could design our computers so they can be upgraded every year. And instead of buying If you think about a big organization and it has 250,000 employees, if you're depreciating a desktop every 3 years, you're buying 100,000 desktops every year. And so the question is, could we buy those computing devices for the data center and then waterfall off older data center devices sooner to improve our energy efficiency? So yeah, I think a lot about that. But does it come up every day? It's like they design, here's the rack design, this is our cooling design for the data centers. It's pretty much when the data center's built out, we get to decide it. And then when we're buying servers, we think about the energy consumption of the servers.
Thanks, Jacob. Question here? And then, folks, we've got time for probably one more question after this.
Just wanted to ask a little bit about how the West Coast banks and East Coast banks maybe compete in terms of, we had a financial meltdown and a lot of it was focused on financial capitalization and that. How many see the investment in technology, R&D, as being a competitive advantage, and actually how much emphasis is put on that in terms of, I think some of the West Coast banks maybe is seen as being a little bit more focused on technology and using that as a way to gain a competitive edge in the marketplace, or is it just purely driven by assets under management and things like that?
Now, I am from the East Coast, so I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was a part of that bank that got acquired by Wells Fargo and called Wachovia.
Well, we didn't acquire, it was a merger of equals.
But I always looked at this as being, from an East Coast bank perspective. So I was with First Union Capital Markets and then Wachovia Corporate Investment Bank. I always looked at it as being very technology driven, from an organization trying to stay ahead, be on the leading edge. Wells was as well. So we merged together. It was a very interesting culture that was built. I can only speak for Wells, and I can share. I do know about some things in other banks. I think they all embrace technology. So it's pretty obvious they have the conferences in New York all the time with that. They attend them. But at Wells, during the merger, they allowed us to build this lab capability all the way through the merger. And I think that means something because they looked ahead and they said, okay, we're in the merger now. You know what happens in mergers. Things get put on hold. The priority is to merge the systems. And new stuff kind of takes the back burner for a while. And so they were very thoughtful in thinking ahead and saying, hey, let's build this capability out that once we're done with this, we're going to enable our teams to innovate and embrace the technology sooner. And I think if you look at Wells, we're not the only ones with an investment fund. So I think East Coast banks, West Coast banks, they have them for the tech specifically. I'd say we're probably best. So we're there.
Right, so if you're talking East...
Not because we're just based in Silicon Valley.
Other banks also have innovation labs.
I know some.
They absolutely do. And if I can just interject, because that's a big part of our Octave's business model and our origin is coming out of the research and development group at Credit Suisse. But our clients today on Wall Street all have innovation labs. Some of them have dozens of innovation labs globally. And the observation that I would make is that not all of them operate them as scientifically or with the governance model that it calls for. But they're all embracing innovation. They all view it as a technical competitive advantage to supporting the business in very specific areas of the business. And I don't know any of them that don't embrace the emerging technology firms that knock on the door, at least to have a discussion.
And if I can add, Wells is both East and West. And the second thing is, I cannot give you comparative numbers because I haven't done a detailed analysis, but maybe there was an implication in your question, perhaps Wells, because in the West Coast a little behind the investment in technology by the East Coast. All I can say is we are in the heart of Silicon Valley. I interact with startup companies almost every day. I doubt if any of the West Coast companies would be doing something like that because of the nature of our location and our philosophy and everything else. And the other part is, given the nature of what has happened with the West Coast companies and East Coast companies in the last 3 years, litigation and everything else, we're the only one actually who is not into any of those things. So we have more investment happening in different areas compared to other friends in the last few years. Would that be a fair statement?
No, it absolutely would. And that is an interesting point, is that what we're witnessing is that most of the innovation labs on Wall Street support the deal flow of the investment bankers of those firms.
Yeah, I just mentioned that most major financial institutions have significant investments in technology, specifically capital markets. They are in the forefront when it comes to calculations and simulations in order to calculate prices and to compute risk. They are very advanced, and I would say that maybe not all the divisions of the bank, but the institutional trading area, basically part of global markets, is you know, they basically get whatever they need. And just like Wells is on both sides of the U.S., all the major banks, one of the major banks is also the same thing as a result of acquisitions. You know, started in North Carolina, then acquired banks that were from the West. You can guess the name. So there's a lot of that going on.
Thank you, guys. Folks, we have time for one more question from the audience. I know we're about at the end time for this session, but happy to entertain another question if there is one. If not,
I've got a question.
Go ahead, Jacob.
So, what's wrong with companies embracing your technologies? And where do you think we can improve in embracing the technology you guys are creating? Or how can we help get you feedback quicker? Just any thoughts on that? How can we improve as you know, being a customer for you guys?
Any suppliers out there care to respond to that?
I'd also respond to that. So I brought up the Open Data Center Alliance question because in supplier roles, finding use groups of banks has always been very difficult. Use groups of banks exist in every metropolitan marketing area. That's the CIOs and the CTOs and the systems administrators and the IT managers in the banks all know each other around town, even though they compete with all these other banks. So at one point in time, you could go to the local VARs or the local consultants, and they knew when all the IT managers met at the banks at some bar once a month. And you could go in as a supplier and then be exposed to the common issues that they would confer about among themselves. So it would be good to have those, it would be good to know about those sorts of use groups. One of the things that the Open Data Center Alliance did is it brought those sorts of use groups into the open in an association. From the standpoint that you have your own innovation labs, obviously communicating how to confer with you and put products into your lab would be useful. But my point is, if there are meetup groups for banks, or meetup groups for IT managers in banks, where vendors could come in and be exposed to their common interests, that would be very interesting. That's one thing that ODCA does, and it's one thing that these hidden user groups of IT administrators at banks or insurance companies or other corporations in a metropolitan marketing area have, but are very hard, very difficult to find out about. So just knowing, knowing where these meetings are held is useful, or establishing those sorts of meetup groups for vendors would be useful.
That's great.
Thank you very much. And if we can, keep this brief, and we'll take it offline if, I appreciate your participation.
Typically, the smaller companies would have difficulty reaching out to decision makers like yourself, especially on the financial side. Usually it would take a senior vice president of sales who's been selling into this sector. And so as you look to newer technologies and more nimble startups that are really embracing the technology, it'll take some work on their part to be able to reach out to you. And so thank you for being here tonight.
Yeah, I agree. That's a big problem. I mean, and on the flip side of it is, I know all these technology managers get calls all the time from salespeople, and they're selling the same thing to 50 different people. I mean, it's exhausting for our guys, but it's really exhausting for you guys when you don't get a sale except every 10th or 15th call. So yeah, I agree. All companies, we should come up with a better way to let you connect to the companies and say, this is our pitch. You know, that would be awesome.
We do that in a smaller way, but I think we need to do that in a bigger and more routine way. So we do invite startup companies like once every quarter to talk to us.
Once a month.
Now once a month, right?
Vendor forum,
So we have that, but we
Yeah.
need to probably do a little more of that.
So there's a guy named Bas Kadali, and he leads our industry relations group, and he's funded by the investment bankers. And so we partner with venture capitalists. So if you have a VC, then talk to your venture capitalists, see if they have a relationship with Wells, and it's Bas Kadali. And once a month, we bring in the portfolio companies, the VCs, and we let them pitch to our technology team members at the same time. So we listen to them, and we try to find a fit. If there's a good fit, we route them to the right team internally. So,
Thanks, guys.
but it's not enough. I mean, really, the sales thing still happens, that churn. So you need to figure out a way, solve that problem. Should be easier.
Should be easier.
We'll leave it at that. Thank you, guys. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you